Okay, so we've got a half an hour together today. I've got a presentation for you that is really focused on how Headwaters Economics is using open data in several projects. I'll give you some examples of projects that where we're working with cities on some municipal planning. And in particular, our focus in this past year in partnerships that we've had with cities is helping give them economic and demographic data that they can interpret and use to direct resources to at-risk neighborhoods. So those are, that's the focus of today. I'm going to just start with a really quick introduction to Headwaters Economics. So my name is Patty Goody. I'm the Associate Director of this group. We're a small Montana-based nonprofit. So we've come a long way. And we actually are on planes constantly because we have projects all over the country. Let me think about the most important things to share with you about Headwaters. So one of the things that always enables you to understand how an organization works is the way that we're funded. So we have about 75% of our funding comes from the philanthropic community and about 25% from contracts, mostly federal. The topics that we work on are typically community development projects, and we also work on land management projects. There is kind of a common thread that works its way through our many diverse research projects. We work on everything from energy tax policy to community development to wildfire preparedness. But the common thread throughout all of those projects, kind of like a three-legged stool, is there's always a focus on people, equality, opportunity. There's always a focus on environmental practices and on economic policy. So those are kind of the thread that runs through all of our projects. What I think is really special and keeps me excited about this nonprofit is that typically in my life, I have been exposed most to economic arguments when they're used to argue for projects that either disenfranchise people or degrade the environment. And we're one of the few groups out there that can objectively and consistently with science demonstrate that empowering people and protecting the environment is good for business, that it's good for the economy. So it's really an inspiring group to work for. And of course, we are a bunch of nerdy economists, so we approach our work using gobs of data and needing to make it accessible and interpretable to decision makers. So this is some of our crew. The picture is a little bit cut off, but this is some of our crew working on a data viz together. One of our strengths is communicating fairly complicated economic and demographic data sets, making them accessible to people. So for, I would say, about 5 years, we have been working with Tableau, and we've been using it in two ways mainly. Initially, we actually started using it as a communications tool. We had already been doing infographics and data visualizations with other tools to communicate some of our research findings. We really were able to step that up and speed up that process when we adapted Tableau. And then over the years, we've used it more and more internally as a research tool to explore data and test hypotheses. So as we've adapted Tableau, it's actually been tremendously helpful for our organization and a game changer, really. So far, everything's working well. Everybody can hear me, and all right, great, thank you. So what I'm going to do in the next 20-25 minutes is take you through a couple of examples of projects that we've been working on in 2018. they're really focused on our city partnerships and the use of open data. One of them is with the city of Austin, Texas. Another is through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We've been working with a group of cities, 18 cities across the Mid-Atlantic and Great Lakes parts of the country. And in these projects, the cities have been trying to direct resources to at-risk parts of their cities. They've been doing a lot of cool things with the information that we're providing, things like prioritizing their capital improvements, developing smarter emergency response plans, increasing conversation and collaboration across city departments. So the bulk of today will be focused on sharing some of those examples of work, but because this is a Tableau conference, I'm going to end with a short kind of fun, like before and after session that shows some of the fun design tips that our group has started to adopt. And by no means are we design professionals, but we've been at it for about 5 years and have learned a lot of fun tips and tricks that I'm excited to share. So the first example that I have for you is from Austin, Texas. Like I said, it's a project that we've been working on through the majority of 2018. The topic is wildfire. And the reason that Headwaters Economics works on wildfire is because as our planet warms, because of human activity and induced climate change, we all know that we are seeing an increase in the frequency and severity of many natural disasters. Wildfire happens to be a big one that is impacting a lot of people in Montana, where we're from, throughout the West, and in other parts of the country too. So it turns out that the use of economic and demographic data is really handy for being better prepared for natural hazards and natural disasters like wildfire, and also in the response and how communities and residents respond. So I'm going to show you how this project in Austin has unfolded. Really, what Headwaters Economics is aiming for is for people with economic and health problems to stay safer when wildfires occur. We're looking for cities to improve their emergency response, to take into account factors like language barriers and people with limited mobility, limited access to vehicles. And we're looking generally, I would say, for people with limited means to have quicker, more direct access to mitigation resources, essentially to the help that they need to be prepared for wildfires. Now, because we are working on wildfire in the city of Austin, it just really actually makes Headwaters Economics cool by association, because it turns out that Rhoda May Kerr is their fire chief, and she is a total rock star. She, just as one example of how amazing this lady is, she's the first female board chair and president of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, which is a very large organization, and in their entire 150-year history, they've never had a female leader until now. So she's incredible, and we are working mostly with her staff in the wildfire division of the city fire department. Also, we're working with some key people in planning and zoning, and also in their Office of Sustainability. So with all of these groups, with all of the people across these different city departments, they've basically expressed the same concern to us. And that's, you have to know a little bit about the history of Austin, Texas. So this was historically a segregated city, and the eastern part remains today the kind of it has lower income population, much more minorities, and yet there's this perception that because the western part of the city is more heavily forested, there's the perception that the fire risk is that there's greater degree of hazard, I suppose, in the western part of the city. So much of the resources for wildfire preparedness and mitigation have been actually directed to the more affluent parts of the city. So people that know about wildfire risk and about the, this history of their city were wanting to argue that to their city manager, to their local elected officials, that there was indeed a high amount of wildfire hazard, and also many other reasons, including the population and demographics in the eastern part of the city, to direct more resources there. So just to, these are a couple of Google street level views of what eastern Austin, Texas looks like, just to give you an idea of what that part of the city looks like. And you can imagine that there would still be wildfire risk there. So knowing what their intent was for the project, we worked for many months with them. The local partners knew that what we provided needed to be objective, that it needed to be data-driven, and they had a purpose for it. They knew who their intended audience that they needed to convince to change behavior, to allocate resources differently. So it was tremendously valuable to have them designing the Tableau resource with us. And I'm actually going to get out of my PowerPoint presentation for just a sec to show you a demo of the tool, which I'll just refresh here. So essentially what you're looking at is, on this left-hand side, you have several filters that as we interact with them, they'll show particular parts of Austin that meet these criteria. And then you've got a map of the city of Austin, and the color is according to the degree of wildfire risk. All right, so what you can do is you can interact with this wildfire potential filter, and let's say we're just going to look at the places that have elevated or higher amount of wildfire risk. So then you're just looking at those neighborhoods. And let's just say that for this example, they were really focused on their evacuation protocol. So they were interested in where there is low income. They're interested in where there might be language barriers, where they might need to deploy bilingual staff in the event of an evacuation. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's just show the neighborhoods where, I don't know, more than 10% of the people live below poverty, and where more than 10% of the people have difficulty speaking English. So now we're left with parts of the city that meet these criteria. Not surprisingly, it's mostly in the eastern part of Austin. And although this is not the most beautiful tooltip in the world, it was designed very specifically by our city partners to have information that they needed access to. There were a few things that I'll just highlight about that particular Tableau tool, the data behind it, and what I thought was cool about the project. It's all open data. Those socioeconomic characteristics that you saw as filters all come from the American Community Survey. The fire risk data set was originally produced by the Forest Service, although the city of Austin did tweak it a bit. The best part of the project really was the fact that it was so collaboratively done with city partners that knew what they needed it for and helped in the design, although obviously that makes a project challenging and sometimes, increases its complexity by quite a lot. But the other thing, though, was that our technical team got to, and let me see if I can slideshow from current slide. So our technical team, if I go back to that last slide, got to do a few fun things with the JavaScript API. These buttons down here were features that the city participants actually asked for that weren't canned functions in Tableau. For example, the ability to zero out all the filters with one click. And so our tech team got to have fun, using the JavaScript API and doing a little experimentation and learning. So I'm going to jump right into the next example. And this is a project that is actually still underway. So that Austin one, if you actually went to Headwaters Economics homepage, I think it's even one of the ones featured on our homepage. This one is still under development, and we'll be releasing it publicly at the end of November. So if you have ideas and feedback, send them my way. The tool that we're developing is called Neighborhoods at Risk. The project has been funded by a group called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And for 18 cities in the Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic parts of the U.S., we're working with 1 or 2 representatives from each city, mostly from their sustainability offices. And it's very similar, actually, to the Austin, Texas tool that I shared with you, in that it's a kind of a decision support tool to give these cities access to socioeconomic and other data that can help them be smarter about the way that they make investments in capital improvements and other outreach efforts, things that the cities do to try to better prepare for all of the challenges associated with the changing climate. In these parts of the country, what they're really seeing a lot of is flooding and extreme heat events. So these are the issues, that they're confronting. So this is the 18 cities that we've been working with are in the tool. And again, I'm going to get out of here to show you a live demo. So for this, let's just go to one of the cities. We'll go to Indianapolis. And the layout will look a little bit familiar to you in that whenever it loads, on the left-hand side, there's this panel that has some filters. There's the map of the city. And then we're experimenting with a kind of a sidebar of information on this right-hand side that shows climate projections. So I'll run through an example. All right, so let's say one of the ways that the cities anticipate using this tool is to direct really large investments that they're making in enhancing tree canopy, because as there's a lot of extremely hot days, that tree canopy can really provide a buffer and has a big cooling effect. And the cities are spending, in some cases, millions of dollars to enhance tree canopy. So let's just say that the mayor of Indianapolis was about to embark on a large tree planting project and wanted to show that that public investment of funds was going to, let's just say, more than 50% of the money being spent was going to go to neighborhoods where there is a great need. So how would they define that? It's up to them, but they could use this tool to say, well, let's look at places that have at least 20% of families living in poverty. We'll look at some other characteristics, like, for example, at least half of the population are minorities. That's, showing you the neighborhoods that meet both of those criteria. And then we've brought in some other publicly available data sets, for example, tree canopy. So we might need to identify places where at least 90% of the neighborhood currently is lacking canopy. So it really gets you down to just, in this case, 5 or 6 neighborhoods within the city that have these characteristics that could get the bulk of the investment. So this, as I said, this tool is still under development. We just came out of a day-long workshop in Michigan with folks from 12 of the 18 cities. And as you can imagine, I came out of that meeting with many, many pages of notes on features that they'd like to see and tweaks that they'd like to see us make. So we have a lot of work cut out for us. And then this will be available on our website at the end of November. But one thing about it that is pretty exciting is that because it's Tableau, and it's also using some of the JavaScript API, we use a JavaScript library that I believe is called React for some of these cool histograms and that, those features. But the whole thing can be embedded, and most of the cities that we're working with on this project are excited to take ownership of this and embed the tool within their own city pages, have that branding and ownership of it. And there are other innovative things that we've done with this particular tool because it's available for 18 cities, and our hope is to make this a resource that can be available nationally, eventually to all cities in the U.S. We built it to support annual data updates as the Census and some of the data sources release their data annually. They'll be reflected in the tool. And the whole thing was designed with scalability in mind. So where am I at here? This is a super quick overview of some of the data sets that we used in that tool. All of the data are publicly available. The demographic and economic data are again from the American Community Survey. We're typically using their 5-year estimates, which are released annually, though. It's kind of a moving window. And then we have data from FEMA. We have data from, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this National Land Cover database, but that's where we're getting our tree canopy and impervious surface. And then one of the most exciting parts of this particular project was that we were working with 4 teams of climate scientists from across the country and getting advice on how we show climate projections in this tool. For Indianapolis, for example, if you're trying to show what parts of the city need more enhancement of tree canopy, it's kind of useful to know that historically they had about 3 or 4 days per year where temperatures reached above 95 degrees. And the predictions by the end of the century are for 62 days per year of temps above 95. So having that sidebar to share what people can expect in terms of the changing climate is eye-opening and relevant to have all of that together as you're trying to identify neighborhoods where more resources are needed. This particular data set people refer to as LOCA, so localized constructed analogs. I am not a climate scientist, but that's why we're working with so many climate science teams. It's part of the data. It's actually somehow a mashing together of 32 predictive climate models. This is quickly becoming a national standard for the U.S. It's the main data set that's used in the upcoming national climate assessment. So I think it's time to transition. Basically, what I've showed you so far are some deep dive projects where we've worked really closely with city partners, and they are we're really throwing quite a lot of information at the cities that they can interact with to identify neighborhoods where they need to be targeting more work. But this is not the only way that Headwaters Economics uses Tableau. Actually, one of our favorite ways, we are a research shop, and one of our favorite ways to use Tableau is when we are coming out of a research project and we are making sense of our findings and figuring out what we need to communicate to our audience that we have in mind. We often use Tableau for outreach. So the kind of tips that I'll share with you are more related to sharing findings and making kind of a punchier, message-driven visualizations. So when we do this, we have found that we get a lot of traction if we embed a visualization directly in the narrative. And if we are really sure we are critical of each other's work at Headwaters Economics, it's one of our strengths to, sit down as a team and help make each other's work better. We just make sure that there's at least one thing that is clear. There's one primary point that a visualization is making. So I'm going to show you a few examples of that. So my colleague Scott Story is wandering around somewhere, so you might run into him among these 17,000 people that are here. He put together this visualization that looks at, since the recession, even though this is a period of economic recovery, the United States is still confronting a major problem, which is in these purple areas, those are the places where the share of families living in poverty is actually still increasing. So it's a simple viz, it's making that point. He wrote some information in the text around that. Similarly here, my colleague Megan, in the days before Hurricane Irma, she was making a relatively simple point that there are some neighborhoods that are frequently threatened by hurricanes that are more likely to have real challenges in the event of needing to evacuate. These are places in red shown on this Tableau little visualization that you can mouse over and learn more about those communities, but essentially places that have a high level of poverty and have a lot of households with no access to a vehicle. Similarly, another very focused, simple visualization is this one that we made on the parts of the United States that are most reliant on Medicaid. So in the event that there are cuts to Medicaid, these will be the parts of the country that are most impacted, where they feel the impacts the most. And when we do these kind of more message-driven visualizations, what we see is that news media outlets will very often steal them, embed them right into their stories, which is terrific because that gets more eyes on the visualizations. So we love it. This is one of our favorite things to do with Tableau. It gets a lot of attention and a lot of traction. Now, just because it's fun, I'm going to share with you some before and after slides. It's like kind of like Makeover Monday, I guess. So, but there's a purpose here, which is at Headwaters, it has been really wonderful for us to use Tableau as a data exploration and kind of hypothesis testing as an analytical tool. And it serves that purpose really well. We at some point, though, have come into the habit of transitioning when we're ready to do communications and outreach. This is the same topic. On the left-hand side, it's what it looks like when we're using it internally to research the issue. On the right-hand side is what it looks like when we're ready to communicate the most important, part of the story. Same deal here. On the left, we've got tables, we've got a million options for manipulating the data. This is what it looks like when we're researching. here we've figured out what we want to communicate, and so this is what it looks like by the time we actually embed it into one of our web pages or a partner's web page. This is this is one of the ones that has made me laugh the hardest, because we had a work session on our team where we all sat at a table together, and nobody could make any sense of this except for the lead researcher that was working on it. It was like impenetrable to the rest of our team. So he needed all that information, though, to make sense of the issue that he was working on. And by the time we figured out what we needed to communicate to partners, this is what it ended up looking like. So I got a little quote here to end the show from our executive director, Ray Rasker. He gets excited about the use of technology to share our results and our work. So he says, Tableau has been super handy for us to get our work in front of people, to get it to be usable, to get to the point where people can draw insights from it. He has kind of like a colloquial Montana version of this quote, essentially where he says, we put the hay where the goats can get to it. So, it's funny, but the truth is that a big reason that people keep coming back to Headwaters Economics for credible information on the connections between equity and the environment and the economy are because we can, not only be unbiased and critical thinkers when we're wrestling with these issues, but we've also been able to use tools like Tableau to communicate what's meaningful about our research. So, hopefully I'm on time. I haven't been keeping track, but I just want to say a huge thanks to all of you for coming to the session. I hope you have all a super productive and fun week here. I'm really excited about it. And this is a weird session where they have not allotted time for Q&A, and I know many of you will probably scurry off to other great sessions, but this is my information. I'm certainly going to hang around. They'll kick us out at some point because really soon there's another speaker, but I'm going to kind of hang around if anybody wants to chat, or feel free to reach out to me. I'm here all week. Thanks, everyone.